Okay. So when I ask you, when we ask you which movie you picked, you say Oblako-Ray. Why?
Yeah, the backstory is that I was a juror at the Locarno Film Festival in 1991. They wanted a non-filmmaker as part of their jury. I'd never been to a film festival, but who would pass up a chance to spend a week, 10 days in Locarno? So I said yes. And two things. One is I had no idea that I had to see so many movies in 10 days. But the worst part was that I actually couldn't leave during the movie. And there are so many movies you walk in and 5 minutes later you don't like this movie. But all of the filmmakers for every movie sat behind the jurors. So even if you nodded off, they knew you know. Anyway, so it was a long week for me. But it came down to jurying came down to two films that were argued over for the top prize. Oblako-Ray was one of those films, and the other one was an American film by Tom DeCillo called
Johnny Suede?
Johnny Suede, which was Brad Pitt's first movie, I believe. And the film festival was all sort of first directed films, right? So, and it was very international, and it was the time as well, I guess. There was a lot of political films at that time, a lot of incredible sincerity and pathos and stuff like that. My recollection of the experience was that many of the films from like Algeria or Tunisia or India or wherever were black and white films. In fact, I remembered this film being black and white. And when I mentioned it to you, I sort of described it as a black and white film. Anyway, I voted for and argued for Johnny Suede. And I argued for it with a great cinematographer named Michael Ballhaus, who also loved Johnny Suede. And Johnny Suede was gorgeously shot film. It was the 90s. It was very American. It was very ironic and sort of over the top in terms of imagery. If you ask me today to describe the film, basically the only thing I remember about it was that Brad Pitt had this weird hairdo. I mean, like, seriously weird hairdo. And pretty much that's it. I don't actually remember what the film is about at all. But I remember at the time sort of feeling like it was fresh and contemporary and somehow gave a little bit of sort of opened up the language of film more than this film or other films that were like this did. And Johnny Suede won and was given the top award. And as I said, I can't remember anything about Johnny Suede other than a couple of images, really. But other than the fact that I thought this was black and white, I could almost tell you scene from scene. So it has incredibly penetrating the narrative of this movie, and so I was happy to get to see it again, and sort of outside of the context of competition and exhaustion.
Do you still like it? What do you find captivating and stay with you so many years? And
yeah, I mean it's ironic for me because it actually is a lot closer to me in terms of the kind of art that I try to make. My relationship to narrative and to sort of, in painting, sort of straight talking in a way. And also to a kind of underlying sense of humor about the kind of essentially absurdity of life, and which I think this film captures so beautifully and poignantly.
And I think actually the colors, even in this poor quality file we saw, the colors are rather interesting. I mean, this sort of the use of oranges and the blues and the sort of livid imagery in the village, and
yeah, I think it was so sort of toned down and then complementary in that way that was an interesting device. It was also something that sort of created that sense of the existential, and that it gave you such a sense of this place being profoundly limiting. I mean, the way I ultimately came to understand this film was that it was basically their moonshot. This kid represented the hope that we all felt when we took off for the moon, and on such a simple level. And the poignancy in the last scene of him in that capsule, looking out, looking back, looking at the trajectory forward to a horizon that was unknown and empty, looking back to a kind of blur and stuff. That was an extraordinary kind of conclusion to that movie. So.
Yeah, and I think it speaks of the time, this historical time that the Soviet Union was, as the idea of wanting to be go away, leaving, no idyllic, dreary industrial Siberian town.
Well, just that the Pacific Ocean represents such hope for them. So
and it's there's almost vampiristic quality that the village has. They don't want to know about him at the beginning. They're like, and then they sort of suck in into this dream. It really doesn't want to go, but they kind of run him out of time so that he fulfills their dream projection. I mean, it's the ascent.
I love the nightmare of his decision, and then the next thing people are coming in and just taking his stuff.
I know.
So he has to go.
Yeah, he has to. I read, because I never saw it, in the sequel, Kolya which was done in 2005, Kolya comes back, and they start a big party for him, but then they want to run him out of town immediately. They still don't want him there. So I mean, it's
because he whistles still.
He whistles, yeah. And another film of the same director, which was done a few years after this, which was also very famous, is about a soldier in Siberia, a young soldier that pretends to be a traffic cop. And the traffic starts going around him, and start following him, and it creates enormous disasters. So is this really, as I mentioned Beckett before, but it is theater of the absurd. I mean, Eric, you said before that this is close to the way the way you relate to your art. How would you describe the relationship with your work and film, and how film impacts it, if in any way?
Yeah, well, I owe a lot to filmmaking. I grew up watching TV and movies and looking at magazines and picture books long before I saw painting and sculpture. So I was informed visually by that early on, and it made a big impression. And also, it was, film is where narrative went when it left painting, right? And took over that responsibility. And storytelling is something, in my studio, it starts with me talking to myself, and then, hopefully engage an audience with the same sort of sense that there's a narrative going on here. My moments feel like they're stopped in a place where there's a before and an after, and that's very sort of filmic, I think. So.
And I mean, one of the points that the series is making, in without being too pretentious, is that there is especially in recent year, the relationship between visual arts, painting and film has become deeper. And do you see that? I mean, it seems to me that not only a lot of painters are making film, but it seems that this cross-pollination has brought a closer quality of narrative to film itself. So you said film took over a narrative when painting stopped being narrative. But it feels right now that because of the influence of painting and digital technologies, this sort of looser narrative quality, more abstract, has come to film.
Oh yes.
Yeah, that's my idea.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's because of painting pushing film, or because we so naturally have a need for constantly, revitalizing the way we tell ourselves the stories, because the stories we tell are all the same stories, right? And so the job of the artist is to constantly try to revitalize them, reanimate them in some way, and sometimes that's through technological advances, and other times through just a shifting point of view. So
yeah, no, I was thinking, for example, even in big Hollywood action films, the edits is so tight, and the action is so synthetic that you feel like some Stan Brakhage is moved towards big blockbuster Hollywood to a certain extent. I think narrative cinema is becoming more abstract. And
I wasn't part of the argument, but somebody the other day was arguing that experimental film didn't go anywhere. That Stan Brakhage and Paul Sharits and people like that were sort of very limited. They gave it over to Michael Snow, and that was about it. So.
Oh, actually, I think the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the opposite. I think it's very vital, the avant-garde into mainstream film these days.
I mean, this film is just so straightforward a narrative trajectory. I mean, it's more along the lines of theater almost in that. In the way it tells the story or frames the moment and stuff. But I have to say that opening sequence of sort of the bird's eye view flying over what becomes increasingly barren landscape, a depressing landscape, and then sort of hearing the footsteps, and then following those footsteps floor by floor down. I just thought that was hysterical.
With the echo of the empty drab building. Yeah. Does anyone have any question? Yes. There. The use of music also that makes it slightly circus-like. There is a degree of grotesque in some of the shots, and the mother of the girlfriend.
Oh my God! Right, terrifying. Yeah. But also the main character had such an elastic face.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like reminds me of remember Joey Brown, American actor character from way back when. I was growing up as a kid, but he had this like gigantic mouth, and he'd sort of introduce himself, and
Uh-huh.
whatever, and this mouth would just open up, and you'd almost be swallowed by it.
Yeah, no, it's a little caricature.
Yeah,
The
very much
exaggeration
so,
of caricature.
Yeah, and the kid was so wide-eyed.
Yeah, and that last shot, which is this with a blonde kid with a bicycle, chasing the bus, blonde, beautiful.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I certainly didn't make the connection until just watching it now. But 1991, very pivotal in not just in Russia and the glasnost that you were talking about, but also in China. There's a whole generation of Chinese painters, Chinese artists, but more familiar with the painters, who were trained in the Soviet academy. They're in the 80s, and they were trained to move into the profession of portraiture and historical narratives and all those kind of things. That was how they were going to make their living. And they get out of school, and China's changed, and there's no the commissions aren't there. The thing is shifting, and so they start to self-express. And there's a small opening for them to be able to do that, but they have to be incredibly careful. And so they create sort of these genre scenes, but they have like too many people who aren't smiling, or there's too many people sitting on the sidewalk. They just sort of add a few things that change it from the Chinese social realist optimism kind of thing to this like undercurrent that things are changing and whatnot, and that feel of the danger that they're playing with in terms of self-expression, in terms of anti-political stuff is very compelling, and it's interesting that there might be that aspect to this movie as well. That they are showing you a Russia that isn't, optimistic.
No, and also that the existentialist bent would have not been part of social realism, because and there is a lot of existentialism in the film and in the character. There's the inner emptiness, and and I think part of the reason that maybe this filmmaker is not as known as other Russian filmmakers is because it's so specific, and the Russian films that make the big international festival they have a bigger, more artsy look, and it's Tarkovsky and Sokurov and Parmigiano. They are transcendental. This is a very specific taste, and I think that, but he keeps working. He's kept working, and
maybe that applies to what you're saying, or maybe it doesn't. But my sort of general theory about the avant-garde is that it requires a strong retrograde in order to measure the radicality, the space between the retro and the avant, right? And if you look at like the history of modernist painting, you'll see that there's always one or two more traditional modernists that are going along, being brought along critically with the more advanced. So you have Picasso and Braque, and then you also have Matisse, which is holding on to a tradition that's not letting all of it go. Or you have Balthus, who is not letting go of the tradition that the other surrealists are letting go of, and you kind of move up through that, and so maybe he fits into that.
I think so. I think that's a really good observation, and it's profoundly Russian, and yet it's satirical and not not of the system.
Yeah.
Any question?
you're asking me that. No, I mean, I think it encompasses a thing that the politics hasn't been able to actually correct. So in that sense, it's very political, but it's showing you a society that has very little hope, so that the smallest shift in that, which is to say, somebody in a fit of whatever fantasy says, I'm out of here, and the next thing you know, it's the biggest expression of hope anyone could get behind, right? I mean, that shows you that, at that time Russia was definitely not a positive environment for moving forward anyway.
I mean, if you think of the wife of the gentleman with the mustache, he goes and visits the kitchen, and she's sort of drab, and then she comes down and she's just beautiful. It's another person, and she gets all dressed up because she found a reason for.
This is it.
I mean, that's why the film is so great, because there are all these little touches. It's so essential, but everything is, and the whole relationship with the girlfriend, is not good enough for her, and then at the end she's like, write me, I'll wait for you. It's just all, it's really wonderful. I'm so delighted that Ari picked it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I love they called her a terrorist.
Yeah, terrors. Yeah. 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 Did everyone get what she was saying, or you want me to? Oh, no. She was pointing out that she was going back to April's observation on Fellini and noticing the circus element and how it all feels like a performance, and what can be found in such desolation and she was juxtaposing the desolation of the place, and then the idea they're eating caviar. So the idea of performance to a higher thing of life, higher quality of life as well. Yeah, yeah. Waiting for Godot. Beckett. Yeah. 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 The Far East, yeah. I mean, yeah, everything is painted with a gray color, except you have this orange and blue, but they're also very livid. Yeah. No, no, it's there. It's there. He says it. It's Collier says it. Yeah. Yeah. Collier says it. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very much theater of the absurd. Very, very. And it was pretty subversive in Russia in 1999, in 1990. Yeah. There was someone there. the song, it says Oblako-Ray, which is the title of the film, and it's translated like cloud heaven or cloud paradise. I don't know the rest of the word, but the beautiful song is the title of the film. The version that we could obtain of this movie is a file, so, and yet the subtitles were there. So I don't know if there is anywhere in Russia where there is a place where one could probably subtitle the song as well, but we didn't have the means to do it. But it wasn't meant to be hiding the word. It's just simply that the subtitles that were in the film are the dialogue, and so the songs are not translated. And Peter. No, it is. See. Yeah. But this is what we try to do with the cinema. I mean, the opportunity to show things that haven't been seen before, and to bring in people that are passionate about film to talk about them. And it's part of the fun, is not to be predictable. And this is
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I thought I was way too clever in choosing this film. At first I thought, this will blow their minds. No one's ever heard of this. I'll look so smart. And then I started to think, oh, God, what if it's a terrible film? And,
No, I was actually embarrassed because I never heard of it, and I'm not a specialist in Soviet cinema, but I've seen few films and few Russian films. And I was just like, what is this? And so it was an interesting challenge, but I'm really happy we did it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he goes grand. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Gail. I live for this moment, so thank you.
I think we have time for one more, and then we have to go. There.
There's a weird connection to what you just said, but I don't know how many of you saw the royal wedding, but the royal wedding, of course, it was at the other spectrum in terms of haves and have-nots, but it was something where it was all about hope, and it was all about the possibility of a future that was captivating and different than the one we know, and so in terms of storytelling, I don't think it's necessary to have it be just about one kind of social structure or another, but it has to do with finding an essential aspect that relates to all of it, which is basically that if we can't believe in something positive through our ceremonies, our rituals, our symbols, etc., then we're in desperate situations, and so much of what we live in today is, I think, profoundly cynical about those kind of things, and certainly within the art world that I came into, so much of it was about sort of deconstructing all of those symbols, all of those rituals, to separating meaning from image, meaning from words, whatnot, in a kind of anarchistic way that ultimately left us with very little. And so you find something like this where that reassertion that no matter what you have, whether you have a lot or a little, if you don't have hope, if you don't have a sense that there's a better future, then you're kind of screwed. So.
Okay, last. Could you speak a little louder? Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. I think the trajectory of the avant-garde was something that was I mean, it was so huge and important. And
Eric, let me just summarize, because I don't think
I don't know if I can summarize, but he was defending the film avant-garde.
Yeah, it was just going back. It was just going back to what we were talking about before about Stan Brakhage and Bruce Betty, and he wanted to. It said he wanted to make a little defense of the avant-garde and said it's powerful and poetic and still very relevant.
As an artist, I love to wipe out as many other artists as I possibly can. So forgive me for that, but. I was thinking that the collage is to the like the 20th century what perspective was to the 15th century. With perspective in terms of visualizing the world, ways of capturing the world. Perspective was an artificial structure that gave you the feeling that you were seeing dimension, you were seeing space. And that illusion was profound. And so perspective was to seeing what collage is to thinking. And what collage did was sort of gave us an artificial way of understanding how we associate things, how we store and how we sort of piece back together for meaningfulness, etc., fragments. And I'm thinking of this in terms of the Stan Brakhage and people like that, where the collage aspect was so profound and so upfront in their work. But the one aspect of collage, something I've always kind of worked against because of such a profound discomfort with it, even though it is a reality, is that it's essentially ahistorical. So when you're constructing a narrative that has no beginning and end kind of thing, and you're finding the middle part, collage makes it even that much more complicated because these fragments are coming from places that have no connection to each other whatsoever. And for me, the question is, moving forward, is whether that the avant-garde has pushed collage to its most extreme sense of disconnect. Can it be pushed farther into that in a way that somehow functions in art in a way that it culturally used to, which was to bring us together? Or is it something that is actually working against us as a society and as a culture now? In which case, is there another way to rethink the expressive mediums towards that purpose? So,
well, it's interesting. Certainly applied to cinema, because cinema is an art that is supposed to bring people together.
Right.
And the disconnect with reality and the disconnect with story is an issue. I think it really is. Yeah, it really is. But
no. Thank you.
Myrna? Yeah. He was trying to get attention. I mean, I think we've been erased here. Next is the Misfits with David Saleh on the 2 weeks from now. The 16. Thank you.
Thank you.